The morning sun beat down merciless on the desert floor when Dalton Zimmer spotted the covered wagon sitting crooked in the distance. One wheel broken clean off, the canvas torn and flapping in the hot wind like a dying bird. Something about the stillness of it made his gut tighten as he urged his horse forward, dust rising from the cracked earth with each step. And when he got close enough to see the small handprints smeared across the weathered wood, he knew whatever waited inside that wagon was going to change everything. He dismounted slowly, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud, and approached with caution. The silence was unnatural out here, where even the buzzards seemed to have abandoned this stretch of Nevada wasteland between Verde and the next town over. His hand rested on the pistol at his hip, not from fear of attack but from the instinct that came with 28 years of hard living in 1876. "Hello." His voice carried across the emptiness, swallowed by the vastness. "Anyone there?" A sound reached him then, so faint he almost missed it beneath the wind. A whimper. A child's whimper. Dalton's heart kicked hard against his ribs as he rushed to the back of the wagon, pulling aside the tattered canvas. The sight that met him knocked the breath from his lungs. Two children huddled together in the corner, their faces streaked with dirt and tears, their clothes hanging loose on frames that had clearly missed too many meals. A girl, maybe 7 years old, clutched a boy who could not have been more than 4, her blue eyes huge in her sunken face. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please, do you have water?" Dalton was already reaching for his canteen, kneeling beside them in the cramped space that smelled of sweat and fear and something else he did not want to name. "Easy now," he said, keeping his voice gentle as he helped the girl drink first, then the boy. "Not too fast. That's it. Small sips." The boy drank like he had forgotten what water tasted like, and Dalton had to pull the canteen away to keep him from making himself sick. "When did you last eat?" 2 days, the girl said. "Maybe 3, I do not know any more." "Where are your folks?" The girl's face crumpled and fresh tears carved clean tracks through the grime on her cheeks. "Mama went for help. Papa died 4 days ago." There was a sickness, and he just kept getting worse, and then he stopped breathing, and Mama, she buried him out there. She pointed a shaking finger toward a mound of disturbed earth about 50 yards from the wagon. "She said she would find help and come back for us. She took the horse and told us to stay put, but that was yesterday morning, and she has not come back." Dalton felt rage and sorrow war inside his chest. What kind of desperate situation forced a mother to leave her children alone in this God-forsaken stretch of desert? But he already knew the answer, the kind where staying meant watching all 3 of them die slowly. "What's your mama's name?" "Teresa," the girl said. "Teresa Zimmerman. I'm Dorothy, and this is my brother Samuel." "Well, Dorothy and Samuel, my name is Dalton Zimmer, and I'm going to help you. First, we are going to get some food in you, and then we are going to find your mama. You have my word on that." He gathered them both in his arms, surprised by how light they were, and carried them to where he had set up his bedroll the night before, under the sparse shade of a Joshua tree. He had been heading to Verde with a string of horses to sell, taking his time, enjoying the solitude that came with the trail. That plan was forgotten now. From his saddlebags, he pulled out jerky and hardtack, watching carefully as the children ate, making sure they took it slow. Samuel barely spoke, just stared at him with enormous brown eyes, but Dorothy talked once she had food in her belly, the words tumbling out like she had been holding them in too long. "Papa wanted to start a ranch in California," she said. "We came all the way from Missouri. It took months and months. Everything was fine until we got to Nevada, and then Papa got sick, and we had to stop because he could not drive the wagon anymore. Mama tried to take care of him, but nothing helped. He just got sicker and sicker until he died." Did your mama say which direction she was heading when she left? Dorothy pointed east. Toward Verdi. She said there was a town that way and she would bring back help. Dalton calculated distances in his head. Verdi was a solid day's ride from here, maybe more on foot. If Teresa Zimmerman had left yesterday morning, she should have reached it by now, unless something had happened to her along the way. The desert was cruel to those who traveled it unprepared, and a woman alone, already weakened by days of caring for a dying husband and starving children, would be vulnerable to any number of dangers. "How old is your mama?" he asked, then felt foolish for the question. It did not matter for finding her, but some part of him needed to know. 26, Dorothy said. She had me when she was 19 and Samuel when she was 22. Young then. Too young to be widowed and alone out here with 2 babies to feed. The thought made something protective and fierce rise in Dalton's chest, a feeling he had not experienced since his own mother died when he was barely older than Dorothy. He made his decision quickly. "Here's what we are going to do. I am going to take you both with me, and we are going to ride to Verdi. If your mama made it there, we will find her. If she did not, then we will backtrack and search for her along the way. But I am not leaving you here alone for another minute. What about Papa's grave?" Dorothy asked, her voice small. Dalton looked at the distant mound of earth, then back at the girl's anxious face. "Your papa would want you safe and fed. That's what we are going to make sure happens. We can come back later if you want to, once we have found your mama and gotten you all settled." He fashioned a sling from a blanket and secured Samuel against his chest, the boy's head lolling against his shoulder in exhaustion. Dorothy rode in front of him on his horse, a strong buckskin gelding named Ranger who took the extra weight without complaint. The string of horses he had been leading, he tied to the back of the broken wagon with enough slack in the rope that they could graze. He would come back for them later, or send someone to fetch them. Right now, nothing mattered except finding Teresa Zimmerman. They rode through the heat of the day, Dalton pushing Ranger harder than he normally would, driven by the knowledge that somewhere out there, a woman was alone and possibly hurt. He kept Dorothy talking, partly to keep her awake and alert, partly to learn more about the family he was now tangled up with. "What does your mama look like?" he asked as they crested a ridge that gave them a view of miles of empty desert stretching in all directions. "She has brown hair, really long down to her waist when she lets it down," Dorothy said. "And green eyes. Papa always said she had the prettiest eyes he had ever seen. She is not very tall. Papa used to tease her about having to reach up to kiss him." "She is brave," Samuel spoke suddenly, his small voice muffled against Dalton's shirt. "Mama is the bravest person in the whole world." "I believe that," Dalton said, and he meant it. "It took a special kind of courage to bury your husband alone in the desert, and then walk away from your children, trusting that you could save them by finding help. Most people would have given up or made a different choice. Teresa Zimmerman had chosen to fight." They stopped once to rest the horse and give the children more water and food. Dalton scanned the landscape constantly, looking for any sign of passage, any indication that someone had come this way on foot. The desert held its secrets close, but he had learned to read its subtle language during his years of wandering, and he knew what to look for. It was late afternoon when he spotted it. A piece of fabric snagged on a creosote bush, fluttering like a tiny flag. He rode closer and saw that it was torn from a woman's dress, blue calico faded by sun and wash water. Blood stained one edge. His stomach dropped. He did not say anything to Dorothy, just tucked the fabric into his pocket and urged Ranger forward with renewed urgency. The sun was starting its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and he knew they were running out of daylight. "Mama," Dorothy suddenly screamed, nearly throwing herself off the horse. Dalton grabbed her around the waist, following her pointing finger to where a figure lay crumpled beside a large boulder about 200 yards ahead. He kicked Ranger into a gallop, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Teresa Zimmerman was alive, but barely. She lay on her side, her lips cracked and bleeding, her skin burned red from the sun. Her dress was torn in several places, and her feet were bloody and raw, the shoes she had been wearing long since fallen apart. When Dalton knelt beside her and carefully turned her over, her eyelids fluttered but did not open. "Mama," Dorothy sobbed, trying to climb down to her. "Hold on," Dalton said firmly. "Samuel, you stay right there in that sling, you understand?" "Dorothy, I need you to be strong for just a little bit longer. Get me the canteen." His hands shook as he dripped water onto Teresa's lips, watching for any response. She stirred slightly, a soft moan escaping her, and he felt relief crash over him like a wave. He had found her in time. Just barely, but in time. "Come on," he murmured, supporting her head as he got a few drops of water into her mouth. "You have got 2 babies here who need you. You have got to wake up now." Her eyes opened, unfocused at first, the green that Dorothy had described dulled by suffering. She stared at him like she could not quite make sense of what she was seeing, and then her gaze slid past him to where Dorothy was crying and Samuel was whimpering, and recognition flared. "My babies," she whispered, trying to sit up and failing. "My babies, are they?" "They are fine," Dalton assured her quickly. "Hungry and scared, but fine. I found them at your wagon, and I have been feeding them and giving them water. They are going to be all right, but I need you to drink now, slow and steady." She drank like she had been dying for it, which she had been, and Dalton had to ration it out carefully. He had filled his canteens that morning at a small spring, but they were running low now, and it would be dark soon. They needed to reach Verdi, but Teresa was in no condition to travel far. "Can you ride?" he asked her gently. "I do not know," she admitted, her voice rough as sandpaper. "I walked so far. The horse spooked at a snake and ran off, and I lost everything I had with me. I kept walking because I had to get help for Dorothy and Samuel, but I must have gotten turned around because I never found the town, and then I just could not go any further." "You did not get turned around," Dalton told her. "You were heading the right direction. Verdi is still about 15 miles from here. You would have made it if you had had supplies and water. You got a lot farther than most people could have." He looked at his horse, already carrying more weight than was ideal, and made another quick decision. He would walk and let Teresa ride with the children. It would be slower, but it was the safest option. Getting her onto Ranger was a challenge. She was weak as a newborn kitten, barely able to stand even with his support. He lifted her up, mindful of her burned skin and blistered feet, and settled her in the saddle. Dorothy he placed in front of her mother, and Samuel he left in the sling against his own chest. The boy had fallen asleep there, exhausted by the day's events. "Hold on to Dorothy," he instructed Teresa. "If you feel yourself slipping, you call out. I will be right here." She nodded, her arms coming around her daughter, and Dalton saw tears sliding down her face as she held the girl close. "Thank you," she said, looking down at him. "I do not even know your name, but thank you. You saved their lives." "Dalton Zimmer," he said, taking Ranger's reins and starting to walk. "And you are the one who saved them, Mrs. Zimmerman. You are the one who went for help. I just happened to be the help that showed up." They walked through the evening and into the night, guided by starlight and Dalton's knowledge of the land. He had traveled this route before and knew the landmarks even in darkness. Teresa drifted in and out of consciousness, but Dorothy stayed awake, keeping watch over her mother with the fierce devotion of a child who had already lost one parent and refused to lose another. Dalton talked to keep himself focused, telling stories about the horses he raised, about the towns he had seen, about anything that came to mind. He did not talk about his own family, about the father who had drunk himself to death, or the mother who had worked herself into an early grave trying to keep food on the table. Those were old wounds, scarred over but never quite healed. "Why were you out there?" Dorothy asked at one point. "In the middle of nowhere. I was taking horses to sell in Verdi," Dalton explained. "I breed and train them on a small spread about 3 days' ride from here. Every few months, I gather up the ones that are ready and take them to town to sell. I was in no hurry, so I was taking my time, and that is when I saw your wagon." "God sent you," Dorothy said with simple certainty. "Mama prayed every night for God to help us, and he sent you." Dalton did not know what to say to that. He had never thought of himself as anyone's answer to prayer, but looking at the little girl's face, at her absolute faith, he could not bring himself to disagree. Maybe it was not God. Maybe it was just luck or timing or the random chance that had put him on that particular patch of desert at that particular moment. But whatever it was, he was grateful for it. Verdi appeared on the horizon just after midnight, a scattering of lights that marked civilization. Dalton had never been so relieved to see a town in his life. His feet ached, his back protested the weight of Samuel and the long walk, and he was running on nothing but determination and coffee from that morning, but they had made it. The town was small, just a main street with a handful of businesses and houses scattered around it. The doctor's office was dark, but Dalton pounded on the door until a light appeared in the window and an irritated voice called out. "This better be an emergency." "It is," Dalton called back. "I've got a woman and 2 children in bad shape. They need help now." The door opened to reveal a man in his 50s, gray hair sticking up at odd angles, spectacles perched on his nose. He took one look at Teresa slumped over in the saddle and sprang into action. "Bring them inside. Quickly now." The next hours passed in a blur. The doctor, who introduced himself as Dr. Harrison, examined all 3 of them with efficient thoroughness. Dorothy and Samuel were severely dehydrated and malnourished, but otherwise unharmed. Teresa was in worse condition, with severe sunburn, dehydration, infected blisters on her feet, and the early stages of heat exhaustion. But she would live, Dr. Harrison assured Dalton. She would recover fully with rest and proper care. "You found them just in time," the doctor said, washing his hands in a basin. "Another day or 2, and the outcome might have been very different, especially for Mrs. Zimmerman." Dalton sat in a chair in the waiting room, Samuel asleep in his lap. Dorothy curled up on the chair next to him, refusing to let him out of her sight. He was so tired he could barely keep his eyes open, but he would not rest until he knew for certain that they were all going to be all right. "Doctor." Harrison came out again an hour later. "They are sleeping now. I gave Mrs. Zimmerman something for the pain and infection. She will need to stay here for at least a few days while I monitor her recovery. The children can stay with her if you want, or I can arrange for someone in town to take them in temporarily." "They stay with their mother," Dalton said immediately. "They have been through enough. They do not need to be separated from her now." "Fair enough. What about you? Do you have a place to stay in town? I will get a room at the hotel. Before you go, there is the matter of payment. Mrs. Zimmerman has no money and medical care is not cheap." Dalton reached for his wallet without hesitation. "How much, doctor?" Harrison named a figure that was substantial but not outrageous. Dalton counted out the bills and handed them over, along with a little extra. For whatever else they might need, food, clothes for the children, anything. The doctor's eyebrows rose. "You are a generous man, Mr. Zimmer. Most people would not go to such lengths for strangers." "They are not strangers anymore," Dalton said quietly, looking down at Samuel's sleeping face. "Not after what we have been through together." He carried both children to the room where Teresa was sleeping, laying them carefully on the bed beside their mother. Teresa's eyes opened briefly, and she looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. "You are still here," she murmured. "I am still here. I will be at the hotel if you need anything. Dr. Harrison knows how to find me. Dalton." She said his name like she was testing how it felt. "Thank you does not seem like enough." "It is enough," he assured her. "You just focus on getting better. Everything else can wait." He left before she could say anything more, exhausted beyond words, and made his way to the hotel. The clerk looked surprised to see someone checking in at 3 in the morning, but took his money without comment and handed over a key. Dalton climbed the stairs to his room, stripped off his dusty clothes, and fell into bed, asleep before his head hit the pillow. He woke to late morning sun streaming through the window, and the sound of the town coming to life outside. For a moment he could not remember where he was or why every muscle in his body ached, and then it all came flooding back. The wagon, the children, Teresa. He dressed quickly and went to check on them at the doctor's office. Dr. Harrison met him at the door with a smile. "They are doing much better this morning. Mrs. Zimmerman is awake and asking for you, actually." Dalton found her sitting up in bed, looking 1,000 times better than she had the night before. Her face was still sunburned, her lips still cracked, but there was life in her eyes again, and color had returned to her cheeks. Dorothy and Samuel were on the floor nearby, playing with a set of wooden blocks that the doctor must have found for them. "Mr. Zimmer," Teresa said, and her voice was stronger now, clearer. "Please come in." He stepped into the room, suddenly awkward, not sure where to look or how to act. In the darkness and urgency of the previous night, there had been no time for self-consciousness. Now, in the light of day, he was acutely aware that he was a rough cowboy standing in front of a woman who, despite her current circumstances, had a dignity and grace that made him feel clumsy. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Like I was dragged behind a horse for several miles," she said with a small smile. "But alive, thanks to you. Dr. Harrison told me you paid for everything. I do not know how I can ever repay you." "You do not need to repay me. I am just glad I found you all when I did." "Dorothy told me everything. How you found them, how you took care of them, how you searched for me. You could have just taken them to town and left it at that, but you did not. You went looking for me." Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "My husband used to say that there were still good people in the world if you knew where to look. I think he would have liked you." Dalton did not know what to say to that, so he changed the subject. "I need to go back for your wagon and my horses. It will take me most of the day, but I will be back by nightfall. Is there anything you need from the wagon?" "There are a few things," Teresa said. "Some clothes for the children, a trunk with our important papers, and some items that belong to my husband. If you could bring those, I would be grateful. Consider it done." He rented a wagon from the livery, ignoring the owner's curious looks, and made the long trip back to where he had found the Zimmerman family. The broken wagon sat exactly where he had left it, the horses grazing peacefully nearby. He loaded everything of value into his rented wagon, including the trunk Teresa had mentioned, and spent a few minutes standing by the grave of her husband. "I will take care of them," he said to the mound of earth, feeling slightly foolish for talking to a dead man but doing it anyway. "You have my word on that." The ride back to Verde was slower with the loaded wagon, and the sun was setting by the time he arrived. He returned the rented wagon to the livery and arranged for his own horses to be stabled, then hauled the trunk and bags to the doctor's office. Teresa was awake, and she cried when she saw her belongings, touching the trunk like it was precious beyond measure. "Thank you," she said, over and over. Thank you. Over the next 3 days, Dalton found himself spending more and more time at the doctor's office. He told himself it was to check on their recovery, to make sure they had everything they needed, but the truth was harder to admit. He was drawn to Teresa in a way he had not been drawn to anyone in years, maybe ever. She was beautiful, even battered and recovering, but it was not just her looks that captivated him. It was her strength, the way she held her head high despite losing everything. It was her gentleness with her children, the fierce love in her eyes when she looked at them. It was the way she smiled at him when he brought Samuel a wooden horse he had carved, or when he sat with Dorothy and taught her card games to pass the time. "You are good with them," Teresa said one afternoon, watching him play with Samuel. "Do you have children of your own?" "No," Dalton said, feeling the familiar ache of old loneliness. "Never been married, came close once, but it did not work out." "What happened?" She decided she did not want to be a rancher's wife, wanted to move to San Francisco, live in a big city. "I could not give her that, so she found someone who could." "I am sorry. Don't be. It was a long time ago, and looking back, I think we wanted different things from the start. Sometimes people are not meant to fit together, no matter how much they might want to." Teresa was quiet for a moment, then said, "My husband and we fit together from the moment we met. We were both 18, and it was at a church social in Missouri. He asked me to dance, and I said yes, and that was it. We were married 6 months later." Her voice grew soft with memory. "He was a good man, a dreamer, always planning the next big thing, always sure that prosperity was just around the corner. It drove me mad sometimes, but I loved him for it too." "He got you all the way to Nevada," Dalton pointed out. "That is further than a lot of dreamers make it." "Yes," she agreed. "But it cost him his life, and it almost cost our children theirs. I do not know if that makes the dream worth it or proves it was foolish from the start. You are alive. They are alive. That makes it worth it." She looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. "You are a remarkable man, Dalton Zimmer. I am just a cowboy who happened to be in the right place at the right time." "No," she said firmly. "You are more than that. You are someone who saw people in need and helped them without asking for anything in return. That is not common. That is special." He felt heat rise in his face and changed the subject, uncomfortable with the praise. But her words stayed with him, warming something deep inside that had been cold for a very long time. On the 4th day, Dr. Harrison declared Teresa well enough to leave his care. Though he cautioned her to take it easy and continue applying the salve he gave her for her burns and blisters. The problem was, she had nowhere to go and no money to pay for a room at the hotel or boarding house. Dalton solved that problem the same way he had solved all the others. He paid for a room at the boarding house for her and the children. A simple but clean space with 2 beds and a small sitting area. He also bought them clothes to replace the ones that had been ruined in the desert and arranged for meals to be brought to them from the restaurant down the street. "You have to stop spending money on us," Teresa protested, but there was no real heat in it. She knew as well as he did that she had no other options right now. "I will stop when you do not need it anymore," Dalton said. "Besides, I got a good price for those horses I sold. I can afford to help." The truth was, he had sold the horses for exactly what he had expected, and helping the Zimmerman family was eating into his savings more than he wanted to admit. But he could not bring himself to care. What good was money if he did not use it for something that mattered? He stayed in Verdi, telling himself it was just until Teresa got back on her feet, until she figured out what she was going to do next. But days turned into a week, and then 2, and he was still there, still finding excuses to visit the boarding house, To bring Samuel new toys, or to teach Dorothy how to braid rope, or to sit with Teresa in the evenings and talk about everything and nothing. "What are you going to do?" he asked her one night. They were sitting on the porch of the boarding house while the children slept inside, the desert night cool and filled with stars. "I do not know," she admitted. "I cannot go back to Missouri. There is nothing there for me anymore. My parents died years ago, and I do not have any other family. But I cannot go forward to California either. I do not have the money or the means, and traveling alone with two small children, it would be too dangerous." "You could stay here," Dalton suggested, trying to keep his voice casual. "Verde is not much, but it is a decent town. There are good people here. You could find work, maybe as a seamstress or a cook. Make a life for yourself and the children." Teresa turned to look at him, her green eyes searching his face in the starlight. "Is that what you want, for me to stay?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Dalton knew this was the moment, the one where he could either tell the truth or retreat behind polite distance. He thought about the way his heart kicked up when he saw her, the way Samuel had started calling him Mr. Dalton with absolute trust, the way Dorothy had hugged him the day before and told him he was her best friend. He thought about going back to his ranch alone, to the empty house and the quiet nights, and found he could not bear the idea. "Yes," he said simply, "that is what I want." "Why?" Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. "Because I care about you, about all of you. Because somewhere between finding you in that desert and sitting here right now, you became important to me. Because when I think about the future, I see you in it, and I do not want that to change." Teresa was quiet for so long that Dalton started to worry he had said too much, pushed too hard. Then she reached over and took his hand, her fingers sliding between his, and he felt his breath catch. "I care about you too," she said. "It scares me how much I care about you. My husband has been dead less than a month, and I should be in mourning. I should be focused only on my children. But when you are around, I feel like I can breathe again. Like maybe the world is not as dark and impossible as I thought it was." "You do not have to feel guilty for that," Dalton told her. "You do not have to put your life on hold forever. Your husband would want you to be happy, would want you to move forward. I think you know that." "I do know that," she agreed. "But knowing it and feeling right about it are two different things." "Then take your time. I am not going anywhere. I will wait as long as you need." She squeezed his hand. "You really are remarkable." They sat like that for a long time, hands linked, not speaking, just being together under the vast Nevada sky. It was not a declaration of love or a promise of forever, but it was a beginning, and that was enough. The next week, Teresa found work at the general store, helping the owner's wife with inventory and customers. It did not pay much, but it was honest work, and it gave her a sense of purpose beyond just surviving. Dorothy started attending the small school in town, thriving under the attention of the teacher and the friendship of the other children. Samuel, still too young for school, spent his days with Teresa at the store, charming customers with his shy smiles. Dalton returned to his ranch, a half-day's ride from Verde, to check on things and take care of the horses that needed his attention. He had hired a man to look after the place while he was gone, but there was work that only he could do, horses that knew only his touch. But he came back to Verde every few days, unable to stay away for long. He told himself it was to check on the family, to make sure they were settling in all right, but everyone in town knew the truth. Dalton Zimmer had fallen hard for the widow Zimmerman, and she for him. "When are you going to marry that woman?" Dr. Harrison asked him one day, cornering him outside the general store. "Everyone can see how you feel about each other. No point in dancing around it." "It is not that simple," Dalton said. "She just lost her husband. People will talk if we move too fast." People will talk no matter what you do, the doctor pointed out. That is what people do. The question is, are you going to let fear of gossip keep you from happiness? Dalton did not have a good answer to that, so he changed the subject. But the doctor's words stuck with him, nagging at him like a splinter. It was Teresa who brought it up first, about 6 weeks after they had arrived in Verdi. They were taking a walk together, just the two of them, while Dorothy looked after Samuel at the boarding house. It was evening, the air cooling down from the day's heat, and they walked side by side through the quiet streets. "People are talking about us," Teresa said without preamble. "I know. Does it bother you? Only if it bothers you." She was quiet for a few steps, then said, "I have been thinking a lot about the future, about what I want, what the children need. We cannot keep living in that boarding house forever. Eventually, the money will run out, and even with my job at the store, I cannot afford to rent a real house. And the children, they need stability. They need a home, not just a room." "I have a home," Dalton said, his heart starting to pound. "It is not much, just a ranch house and some land, but it is solid, and there is plenty of room for a family." Teresa stopped walking and turned to face him. "What are you saying, Dalton?" He took both her hands in his, looking into those green eyes that had haunted his dreams since the first moment he saw her. "I am saying that I love you, Teresa. I love your children. I want to marry you if you will have me. I want to give you all a home, a real home, and build a life together. I know it is fast, I know people will talk, but I do not care about any of that. I only care about you." Her eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I love you too. I think I have loved you since that first night when you carried my babies through the desert and did not stop until you found me. I would be honored to marry you, Dalton Zimmer." He kissed her then, right there in the middle of the street, and did not care who saw them. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her arms coming around his neck, and for the first time in his life, Dalton felt truly complete. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church, with Dr. Harrison standing up as witness and half the town in attendance. Teresa wore a simple blue dress that Dalton had bought for her, and she carried wildflowers that Dorothy had picked that morning. Samuel stood beside Dalton, holding the ring in his small hands with the utmost seriousness, and Dorothy cried happy tears through the whole ceremony. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Dalton kissed his bride and felt the last piece of his heart click into place. This was what he had been waiting for all his life, even when he did not know he was waiting. They moved to the ranch the next day, the four of them together in the wagon, their belongings loaded in the back. The children were ecstatic, running around the house and the barn, exploring every corner of their new home with unbridled joy. "It is perfect," Teresa said, standing in the main room of the house and looking around with shining eyes. "It is absolutely perfect. It will be even better once you make it yours," Dalton told her. "Change whatever you want, arrange things however you like. This is your home now." She put her arms around him and held on tight. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for saving us, for loving us, for giving us a future." "You saved me too," he said, kissing the top of her head. "I did not realize how empty my life was until you filled it up." Life on the ranch was not always easy, but it was good. Dalton worked hard training and breeding horses, building up his herd and his reputation. Teresa transformed the house into a real home, sewing curtains and planting a garden, cooking meals that filled the house with warmth and delicious smells. Dorothy thrived in the open space, learning to ride and care for the horses, becoming her stepfather's right hand in the barn. Samuel grew stronger every day, his laughter echoing across the property. At night, after the children were asleep, Dalton and Teresa would sit together on the porch, watching the stars and talking about their day, about their dreams for the future, about how lucky they were to have found each other. You ever think about that day? Teresa asked one evening about 3 months after the wedding. The day you found the wagon, all the time, Dalton admitted. I think about what would have happened if I had taken a different route, if I had been a day earlier or a day later, if I had not stopped to investigate. I think we were meant to find each other, Teresa said. I do not know if it was God or fate or just incredible luck, but I choose to believe that the universe wanted us together. I will believe anything you want me to believe, Dalton said, pulling her close, as long as I get to keep you. She turned in his arms and kissed him, and he felt the same rush of love and wonder that he felt every time she touched him. They went inside and made love in their bed, the one they shared every night, and afterward, Teresa curled against his chest and whispered the words he had been hoping to hear. I am pregnant, she said. We are going to have a baby. Joy exploded in Dalton's chest, so intense it almost hurt. Are you sure? I am sure. I have been feeling different for a few weeks now, and I know my own body. There is a baby growing inside me, our baby. He held her close, his hand resting on her still flat stomach, and felt tears prick his eyes. I love you, he said. I love you so much. I love you too, she said, and there was absolute certainty in her voice. They told the children the next morning, and Dorothy shrieked with excitement while Samuel looked confused until Teresa explained that he was going to be a big brother. Then he got very serious and announced that he would protect the baby from everything, which made both adults smile. The months passed in a blur of happiness and anticipation. Teresa's belly grew round, and Dalton could not stop touching it, marveling at the life they had created together. He built a cradle from wood he carefully selected and sanded smooth, working on it in the evenings while Teresa sewed tiny clothes and blankets. The baby came on a cold February night in 1877, almost a year to the day from when Dalton had first found the broken wagon in the desert. Dr. Harrison made the trip out to the ranch to assist with the delivery, and after hours of labor, Teresa gave birth to a healthy baby boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. They named him Daniel, and Dalton held his son in his arms and felt his heart expand in ways he had not known were possible. This tiny person, this perfect little human, was his and Teresa's, a living symbol of their love and their future. He is beautiful, Dorothy said, peering at her new brother with fascination. Can I hold him? Very carefully, Teresa said, exhausted but glowing with happiness. They gathered around the bed, all of them, this family that had been forged in the desert heat and sealed with love. Dalton looked at his wife, his children, his newborn son, and felt gratitude wash over him like a benediction. This is everything, he said softly. This is everything I never knew I wanted. Teresa reached for his hand and squeezed it. This is just the beginning, she promised. And she was right. In the years that followed, the ranch prospered beyond Dalton's wildest dreams. His horses became known throughout Nevada and beyond for their strength and reliability. He expanded his land, built a bigger barn, hired hands to help with the work. Teresa opened a small shop in Verde selling the quilts and clothes she made, her skill with a needle becoming legendary in the area. Dorothy grew into a beautiful young woman, skilled with horses and unafraid of hard work. She eventually married a kind rancher from the next county over, and her wedding was one of the happiest days of Dalton and Teresa's life. Samuel became a veterinarian, studying in San Francisco before returning to Nevada to open his practice, treating animals throughout the region. He never forgot the man who had saved his life when he was just a small boy starving in a broken wagon. Daniel grew up strong and smart, learning everything his father could teach him about horses and ranching. He inherited Dalton's quiet strength and Teresa's fierce determination, and he eventually took over the ranch when his parents grew too old to run it themselves. Teresa gave birth to 2 more children in the years after Daniel, a daughter they named Grace, and another son they called Matthew. The house was always full of noise and laughter, of children running through the halls and people gathering around the dinner table. It was exactly the life Dalton had dreamed of during those long, lonely years before he met Teresa. They grew old together, watching their children and grandchildren fill the ranch with love and life. Dalton's hair turned silver, and Teresa's face gained lines from years of smiling, but their love never wavered, never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger with every passing year, deepened by shared experiences and mutual respect. On a warm summer evening in 1910, when they were both in their 60s, they sat together on the porch as they had done countless times before. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, and in the distance, they could hear their grandchildren playing in the yard. "You remember the day we met?" Teresa asked, her hand in Dalton's as it had been for over 3 decades. "Every detail," Dalton said. "The broken wagon, the heat, the way Dorothy looked at me with those big, scared eyes. The way I felt when I finally found you by that boulder, like my whole world would end if you did not wake up. I remember opening my eyes and seeing you there, this stranger who had saved my babies, and thinking that God had sent me an angel." "I am no angel," Dalton said with a laugh. "Just a man who was lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time." "You are my angel," Teresa insisted. "You saved us, gave us a home, loved us when we had nothing to offer you in return. You gave me a reason to live again when I thought everything was over." "You gave me a reason to live too," Dalton said, lifting her hand to kiss it. "Before you, I was just going through the motions, existing but not really living. You and the children, you made everything matter. You made everything worthwhile." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon, and Dalton thought about all the years they had shared, all the moments big and small that had made up their life together. The first time Dorothy called him Papa. The night Samuel had a fever and Dalton stayed up with him until dawn. The births of their children. The first time Daniel successfully trained a horse on his own. Teresa's laughter ringing through the house. The quiet mornings in bed before the children woke. The arguments and the making up. The fears and the triumphs. All of it, every single moment had been precious. "I would do it all again," he said suddenly. "Every hard moment, every struggle, every worry, I would do it all again just to end up here with you." Teresa leaned her head on his shoulder. "Me too. I would walk through that desert 1,000 times if it meant finding you at the end." Their children and grandchildren came to the porch then, calling them in for dinner, and they rose together, hand in hand, to join their family. The house was warm and bright, filled with the people they loved most in the world, and as Dalton looked around the table at all the faces smiling back at him, he felt a contentment so deep it brought tears to his eyes. This was what he had ridden hard to find that day in the desert. Not just Teresa, not just the children, but this. This family, this love, this home, this legacy of kindness and courage that would outlast them both. After dinner, when the dishes were washed and the children were saying their goodbyes, heading back to their own homes and lives, Dalton and Teresa climbed the stairs to their bedroom. They got ready for bed slowly, their movements practiced and comfortable after so many years together. "I am tired," Teresa admitted, settling into bed beside him. "But it is a good tired, the kind that comes from a day well spent." "Every day with you is well spent," Dalton said, pulling her close. She nestled against him, her head on his chest, his arms around her, and they lay like that in the darkness, listening to each other breathe. Outside, the desert night was cool and clear, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the moon. "Thank you," Teresa whispered, "for everything, for every single day." "Thank you," Dalton whispered back, "for loving me, for choosing me, for making my life more than I ever thought it could be." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and dreamed of the day they met, of the moment their lives had changed forever, of the love that had carried them through everything that came after. Years later, when Dalton was 72 and Teresa was 70, they celebrated their 38th wedding anniversary with a big party at the ranch. All their children came, and their grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren who were just starting to appear. The house overflowed with people and laughter and love, and Dalton stood with Teresa in the middle of it all, amazed at what they had built together. 38 years, Teresa said, shaking her head in wonder. "It feels like yesterday and forever ago all at once." "Best 38 years of my life," Dalton said, kissing her cheek. "Mine too," she agreed, though the first few weeks were a bit rough. They laughed together, remembering those desperate days in the desert, the fear and the hunger and the pain. It seemed impossible now that they had come through all of that to end up here, surrounded by family and prosperity and peace. But they had. They had survived and thrived, and they had done it together, and that made all the difference. As the party wound down and their family slowly departed, Dalton and Teresa found themselves alone again on the porch, watching the stars come out one by one in the darkening sky. "You think we will have another 38 years?" Teresa asked, a hint of worry in her voice. "I do not know," Dalton said honestly, "but I know that however much time we have left, I want to spend every second of it with you." "That is all I want too," Teresa said, taking his hand. "Just you and me and this life we built together." They stayed out there until late, talking about the past and the future, about their children and grandchildren, about the ranch and the horses, and all the little details that made up their existence. And when they finally went inside, Dalton helped Teresa up the stairs, his hand steady on her arm, and they got ready for bed together just as they had done thousands of times before. In bed, in the darkness, Teresa curled against him and sighed with contentment. "I love you, Dalton Zimmer." "I love you, Teresa Zimmer," he said, holding her close. "I love you more than I can ever say." They fell asleep together, peaceful and content, and outside the window the desert night stretched on forever, full of stars and silence and the promise of tomorrow. The ranch continued to prosper in their later years. Daniel ran it with skill and dedication, making improvements and expanding the operation while always respecting the foundation his parents had built. Dorothy's children often came to visit, bringing energy and chaos that Teresa loved. Samuel's veterinary practice became essential to ranchers throughout the region, and he always made time to check on his parents' horses personally. Grace married a schoolteacher and moved to Carson City, where she opened a library and became an advocate for education. Matthew followed in his father's footsteps, working alongside Daniel on the ranch and eventually marrying a girl from Verdi, whose family had known the Zimmers for years. Dalton and Teresa became pillars of the community, respected and loved by everyone who knew them. Their story had become something of a legend in Verdi, the tale of the cowboy who found starving children in the desert and rode hard to save their mother, then stayed and built a life with them. People told it to their own children as an example of compassion and love, of how one act of kindness could change everything. But to Dalton and Teresa, it was not a legend or a story. It was just their life, the path they had walked together, the choices they had made. They did not think of themselves as special or heroic. They were just two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and decided to build something beautiful together, When Dalton was 75, he started slowing down. His body, which had been strong and capable for so many years, began to ache in ways that rest could not cure. Dr. Harrison, long since retired and replaced by his son, examined him and confirmed what Dalton already suspected. He was getting old, and his body was wearing out. There was no cure for that, no remedy except to accept it with grace. Teresa, still strong at 73, refused to let him fade away without a fight. She made sure he ate well and rested when he needed to, that he took walks every day to keep his strength up, that he stayed engaged with the ranch and the family. She read to him in the evenings when his eyes grew too tired, and she held his hand when the pain got bad, and she loved him with the same fierce devotion she had shown from the very beginning. "You are not allowed to leave me," she told him one night when he was having a particularly difficult time. "I forbid it. We made a deal, you and I, and that deal was forever." "I am not planning on going anywhere," Dalton assured her, though they both knew he did not have much say in the matter. "But if I do, you know that I will be waiting for you, right? Wherever we go after this, I will be waiting." "Do not talk like that," Teresa said, tears streaming down her face. "Please, Dalton, I cannot bear it." He pulled her into his arms, holding her as she cried, feeling his own tears slip down his cheeks. They had known this day would come eventually, that one of them would have to say goodbye to the other, but knowing it did not make it any easier. "Listen to me," he said gently. "We have had a beautiful life together, better than I ever could have imagined. We have children and grandchildren who love us, a home that has stood the test of time, memories enough to fill 100 lifetimes. Whatever happens now, nothing can take that away from us." "I know," Teresa whispered. "I know, but I am still not ready to let you go." "Then I will stay as long as I can," he promised. "I will fight for every single day I have left with you," and he did. Dalton hung on through that winter and into the spring, determined to see one more season change, one more round of foals born, one more family gathering. Teresa stayed by his side through all of it, her love and determination a constant force that kept him anchored to the world. But by the summer of 1913, it became clear that Dalton's time was running short. He grew weaker, despite Teresa's best efforts, and the doctor's son came more frequently, bringing medicine that helped with the pain but could not stop what was happening. On a July evening, with the windows open to let in the cool desert air, and his family gathered around his bed, Dalton Zimmer took his last breath with Teresa's hand in his. She was there at the end, just as she had been there through everything else, whispering that she loved him, that she would see him again, that he could rest now. He died peacefully, a smile on his face, surrounded by the people he loved most in the world. And though his death left a hole in the family that could never be filled, there was comfort in knowing that he had lived a full and meaningful life, that he had made a difference, that he had loved and been loved in return. Teresa mourned him deeply, as did all their children and grandchildren. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Nevada, people coming from far and wide to pay their respects to a man who had been known for his kindness, his integrity, his unwavering devotion to his family. But Teresa did not fall apart. She grieved, yes, but she also continued living because that was what Dalton would have wanted. She stayed involved with the ranch, with her children's lives, with the community. She told stories about Dalton to her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, making sure they knew what kind of man he had been, what kind of legacy he had left behind. She lived for another 7 years, active and sharp until the very end. And when she died peacefully in her sleep in 1920 at the age of 80, her children found a letter she had written to be read after her death. In it, she talked about Dalton, about the day he had found her children starving in the desert and had ridden hard to save her. She talked about falling in love with him, about building a life together, about the joy and the struggles and the absolute certainty that they had been meant for each other. "I have lived a long and happy life," she wrote. "Longer than I ever expected when I was lying in that desert, sure I was going to die. Dalton gave me that life. He gave me hope when I had none, love when I thought I would never feel it again, a future when all I could see was darkness. He was the best man I ever knew, and I have spent every day since he died looking forward to seeing him again. Now that time has finally come and I am not sad. I am grateful. Grateful for every moment we had together, grateful for the family we built, grateful for a love that lasted beyond death. Tell my story, tell our story, so that people remember that love can bloom even in the harshest desert, that kindness can change lives, that sometimes the cowboy really does ride in and save the day. I love you all, and I will be watching over you always." They buried her next to Dalton on the ranch, under a big oak tree that they had planted together years before. The whole family came, and they stood together in the summer heat, saying goodbye to the woman who had been the heart of their family, the matriarch who had held them all together. But even as they mourned, they celebrated too, because Teresa and Dalton's story was not a sad one. It was a story of hope and resilience, of love conquering impossible odds, of two people who had found each other when they needed it most, and had built something extraordinary together. The ranch stayed in the family for generations, passed down from child to child, each one adding their own chapter to the story while honoring the foundation that Dalton and Teresa had built. And every year on the anniversary of the day Dalton had found the broken wagon in the desert, the family would gather at the ranch for a celebration, telling the story to the youngest members, making sure they understood where they came from and what their great-great-grandparents had endured and overcome. The story became part of the family's identity, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is always hope. That kindness matters, that love endures, that sometimes all it takes is one person willing to help to change the course of multiple lives. And somewhere, in whatever place souls go after death, Dalton and Teresa were together again, watching over their family, proud of what they had built, grateful for the life they had shared. Their love, forged in the desert heat and tempered by years of partnership, had created a legacy that would outlast them both, rippling out through generations, touching lives they would never meet, but who would carry their DNA and their values forward into the future. It had all started with a broken wagon, 2 starving children, and a cowboy who had chosen to help instead of riding past. And from that one choice, from that single act of compassion, had grown a family, a home, a love story that would be told and retold for over a century. That was the power of kindness. That was the magic of love. That was the legacy of Dalton and Teresa Zimmer, the cowboy and the widow who had found each other in the desert and had built a life that mattered, a family that endured, and a love that truly did last forever.